I never imagined coming back to Mobile, Alabama. Not after leaving it behind with a heart full of ambition and a startup pitch deck tucked under my arm. Austin was supposed to be my big break. Fast-paced, tech-driven, young. Everything Mobile wasn't. I poured everything I had into an app designed to streamline the used auto parts market. A sleek idea with sleek investors and sleeker coffee shop meetings. But the tech world doesn't run on sweat alone. And I ran out of fuel faster than I ever expected. The investors ghosted. The launch flopped. The app crashed more times than I could count. I'd wake up in cold sweats, code until my fingers ached, and pitch to rooms full of polite nods and slow, we'll be in touch handshakes. I used credit cards like parachutes, hoping one would open before I hit the ground. They didn't. Casey was with me through it all. At first, anyway. Her smiles turned into sighs, then silences. She stopped coming to meetings, stopped asking about the app. She'd come home late from her temp jobs and drift to bed before I'd look up from my screen. I think we both knew the fire was dimming. We just didn't want to be the one to say it out loud. Then came the call. I was in line for a barista interview, one foot tapping with nerves, the other already halfway out the door of my pride. My mom's voice cracked like old wood. "It's your dad." Another stroke. I stood there frozen, sun glaring off the pavement, as the words sank in like oil into concrete. "This one's worse," she added quietly. We left the next day, packed what we could into the back of our aging Honda, and drove the long stretch east. 12 hours of nothing but highway, stale gas station snacks, and radio static. Casey stared out the window most of the way, her arms crossed, her eyes empty. I wanted to reach for her hand, to promise things would be okay. But I couldn't bring myself to lie. Mobile hadn't changed. Same cracked sidewalks, same humidity that clung to your skin like regret. The house I grew up in sagged a little more. The flowers Mom once tended were now brittle stalks. My father lay in a hospital bed, thinner than I remembered, unable to speak. His eyes fluttered when I entered, but they didn't stay open for long. I stood there with a lump in my throat, unsure what to say to a man who had spoken with his hands more than his heart. Then came the shop. Tucker Auto Parts. My inheritance, or maybe my punishment. The moment I stepped inside, I knew how bad it was. Dust blanketed every shelf. Boxes sagged under years of neglect. A cracked vinyl sign behind the counter still read, "Locally owned since 1983, but even it looked tired. The books were worse. Stacks of handwritten invoices, carbon copies, and envelopes with payment notices in red ink. The bank had been calling. Vendors too. The place wasn't just outdated. It was dying. But it was his. And now it was mine. We didn't talk much that first week. I drove to the hospital in the mornings, spent afternoons digging through old stock, and collapsed at home without saying much. Casey cooked some nights, but we didn't eat together. She'd leave plates covered with foil on the stove. I'd reheat them hours later, alone in the flicker of the kitchen light. We hadn't made love in months. We barely touched. Every conversation felt like walking on glass barefoot. I kept telling myself this was temporary, just long enough to fix the shop, settle things, and maybe, if there was anything left between us, start over. I didn't know what I was trying to save more, the business or the marriage. On the fifth day, I sat in my father's old office chair and stared at the ceiling tiles, yellowed from decades of smoke and sweat. I found a photo of him and me in a drawer. Me at 10 years old, holding a wrench too big for my hands, beaming like I'd just fixed the world. He looked proud, or maybe just amused. I couldn't tell anymore. I knew the shop couldn't survive the way it was. No more pen and paper orders. No more waiting on walk-ins who never came. If I was going to do this, I had to gut it and rebuild it from the ground up. Not for pride, not for legacy, for survival. So I started small. I cleaned, tossed what couldn't be sold, ordered a used computer, installed internet, set up QuickBooks, built a basic spreadsheet for inventory, listed some parts on eBay. It felt like pushing a broken-down truck uphill, but it was movement. I'd work until the sun went down, sweating through my shirt, hands coated in dust and grease. I'd look up to see the empty parking lot, feel the stillness, and wonder if I was just pouring more energy into another sinking ship. But quitting again? Failing again? That wasn't an option. At night, I'd sit on a milk crate out back, beer in hand, staring at the stars through the gaps in the trees. Sometimes I'd hear Casey's voice in my head, the way she used to say, "Whatever you do, just don't disappear." And I'd wonder if I already had. I told myself I was doing this for us, for the future we once talked about, for the house she wanted, the kids she mentioned, the life we sketched out in our early years. I believed, maybe foolishly, that if I could just turn the shop around, I could turn everything around. That belief was the only thing I had left. The day I decided to tear it all down, I didn't tell anyone. I just showed up at sunrise with a dumpster parked outside and started throwing things away. Boxes of obsolete spark plugs, shredded catalogs from the 90s, shelves buckling under the weight of parts that hadn't been touched in a decade. For hours, I tossed, sorted, and scrubbed. My arms burned, my shirt stuck to my back, and by noon I looked like I'd been pulled from mine shaft. It felt good. I took a sledgehammer to the rotted counter, replaced it with a clean butcher block top I'd built myself over 2 nights in the garage. I painted the walls, updated the lighting, installed a basic security system, and added a cheap camera over the register. The more layers I peeled back, the more it felt like I was reclaiming the place from the grip of time. This wasn't about making it pretty, it was about making it functional, making it mine. Digitizing the books was like performing surgery on a fossil. Nothing was where it should be. Receipts were scrawled in my dad's near-illegible handwriting. I found sticky notes with prices, IOUs from customers who probably hadn't paid in years, and even a dusty ledger bound in duct tape with the words "Don't touch" written in Sharpie across the front. I touched it anyway. I spent night after night uploading inventory into a CRM system I barely knew how to use. I watched YouTube tutorials, joined Facebook groups for independent shop owners, and started asking dumb questions on Reddit. I hated admitting I was in over my head, but the online world didn't care who you were, just whether you asked the right questions. Once the digital foundation was set, I built a simple website, linked it to a new Google business profile, and set up accounts on Instagram, TikTok, and even Twitter. At first, the idea of putting Tucker Auto Parts on social media felt absurd. Who wants to follow a rundown auto shop in the Deep South? But I needed reach. I needed eyes. So I started recording short videos of rebuilds, restorations, and oddball parts. Me in front of the camera, covered in grime, talking through repairs. I wasn't polished, but I was real. Apparently, that was enough. To my surprise, people started watching, then sharing, then commenting. A guy from Mississippi messaged me asking if I could source a vintage transmission for his '72 Cutlass. Someone in Oregon wanted custom brackets for a project car. A local gearhead offered to collaborate on a video. Within 2 months, we had traction. Orders trickled in. Foot traffic picked up. A high school kid stopped by just to shake my hand, said he'd been watching the shop come alive online and thought it was cool as hell. Cool. That was new. But at home, nothing felt cool. Casey barely looked up from her phone during dinner. When I showed her a TikTok that hit 20,000 views, she gave me a flat smile and went back to scrolling. She used to light up when I shared small victories. Now she just looked detached, like none of it meant anything. I tried to include her, suggested she help with branding or marketing. She'd been good at that back in college, had a knack for design. But she brushed it off. "I'm not really into that anymore," she said. Then silence. Always silence. I kept grinding anyway. The shop needed me. The vision was taking shape, and I refused to let it slip. I reinvested every dollar I made into upgrades, tools, shelving, a new diagnostic system, even a coffee machine for customers. I put flyers up around town, ran local ads, and reached out to old family friends who might still need parts. Most politely declined, but a few trickled in. Word started to spread. Of course, not everyone was impressed. Some of the old-timers scoffed at the changes. "All this computer crap," one guy muttered, squinting at the digital invoice I handed him. Another shook his head at the camera tripod in the corner. "You filming soap operas now, boy?" They laughed, not cruelly but condescendingly, like I was a kid playing dress-up in a grown man's world. Let them laugh, because slowly, the laughter faded. I started getting calls from out of state. Emails from hobbyists and restoration guys who'd heard about the shop through Reddit threads and niche car forums. They didn't care about my location or my name. They cared that I could deliver. And I did. One Saturday, the lot was full for the first time in years. A group of local car enthusiasts had shown up for a pop-up parts day I'd announced online. I handed out free stickers and mugs with the Tucker logo. We grilled hot dogs out back, shared stories, took pictures. It felt like something was happening, something real. That night, I walked into the house buzzing with adrenaline. Casey sat on the couch, legs curled under her, eyes on a crime documentary. I told her the shop had its busiest day yet. Her response was a shrug and a muted, "Cool." I stood there for a second, expecting more. When it didn't come, I nodded, went to the kitchen, and grabbed a beer. Alone again. I didn't want to admit it. Not yet, but I was starting to wonder if we were even building the same future anymore. I kept telling myself this was just a phase. That once the shop stabilized, once the money came in, once she saw it working, she'd come back around. But deep down, a quieter voice had begun whispering something I didn't want to hear. What if the shop wasn't the thing pulling us apart? What if it was the thing exposing how far we'd already drifted? By spring, the shop was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. I'd finally gotten ahead of the debt. The books were clean. Orders were steady. The backlog for custom performance work stretched out 3 weeks. A couple of big-name YouTubers had reached out for collaborations. I'd even hired 2 part-time techs from the local vocational school. Kids hungry to learn, reminding me what it was like to believe in something. I should have felt proud. Triumphant, even. But pride doesn't fill an empty bed. And it doesn't answer you when you talk to the walls. Casey and I barely functioned as roommates by that point. We moved around each other like shadows, brushing past in the mornings, speaking only in half sentences about groceries or bills. I'd come home smelling like burnt rubber and motor oil, exhausted to the bone, only to find her on the couch, scrolling endlessly or gone without a word. Weekend trips with friends became more frequent. When I asked if she'd be home for dinner, she'd just shrug. "Don't wait up." I waited anyway. Every time, the small wins I once shared with her stayed locked in my throat. There was no space for joy in the silence we'd built. But I still held on to the idea that something could fix this, something tangible, something real. Maybe she just needed to see what her support had helped me build. Maybe if I gave back in a visible way, she'd find her way back to us. So I bought her a car. Not a flashy new model, we couldn't afford that. But a gently used white Range Rover, polished, detailed, paid for in cash from the shop's revenue. I'd found it at a dealer upstate, negotiated like hell, and picked it up myself. It was clean, elegant, something she'd always said she wanted when we made it. I brought it home on a Friday evening. Parked it out front, still gleaming under the porch light. I left the keys on the counter beside a note. "For everything you put on hold, so I could chase this." I waited for her to come home. When the front door finally opened just past 9, she walked in with a bag of takeout and a look of detachment. I stood up expecting something, a smile, a question, a thank you. She glanced at the keys, then out the window, then back at me. "That," she said, voice flat. "You think that makes up for the rest of it?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't say another word. She set her bag down, walked past me, and disappeared into the bedroom. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the kitchen clock. I stood there staring at the counter, the keys, the night that had unraveled before it even began. I didn't say a thing. I didn't go after her. I just picked up the keys, stepped outside, and drove the car back to the shop. Parked it behind the bay doors. Locked it. I didn't sleep that night. Sat on the shop floor instead, leaning against the tire balancer, listening to the silence around me. Not even the rats scurried anymore. I thought about all the hours I'd worked, the risks I'd taken, the things I'd put aside, not just for me, but for her, for us. And all it took was one sentence to realize none of it had ever been enough. The next morning, she didn't ask about the car, didn't mention the note. The space between us had shifted into something colder, something final. There was no blowout fight, no messy argument, just a quiet understanding hanging between us like smoke. From that point on, I stopped trying to prove anything. I went to work, I came home, I slept. That was it. When customers complimented the shop, I nodded and moved on. When we hit our best month to date, I celebrated alone. I stopped hoping for her attention, stopped chasing a woman who didn't want to be caught. And slowly, the sadness turned into something sharper, clearer, resolve. Whatever love had once existed between us had eroded into something unrecognizable. She wanted more than what I was offering. Or maybe she wanted someone else entirely. I didn't know. I didn't ask. And I didn't care to know the answer anymore. The Range Rover stayed parked behind the shop for weeks. I never said a word about it, and neither did she. But the message had already been received, loud and clear. After that night, something in me shut off. Or maybe it finally clicked into place. I stopped waiting for her, stopped hoping she'd turn her head and see me the way she used to, full of ideas and hunger and promises. I focused on the one place where effort still paid off. The shop. By summer, Tucker Auto Parts had become something Mobile couldn't ignore. We'd evolved from a dusty relic into a destination for gearheads, performance junkies, and even curious locals who'd once laughed at the idea of a TikTok mechanic. We had a steady stream of customers, online orders flooding the inbox, and enough cash flow to warrant a second location on the west side of town. I found a rundown garage space near the port, cheaper than expected, full of potential. I hired 2 full-time mechanics, a front desk manager, and a digital marketing assistant to handle our online presence. I stopped filming TikToks myself and started appearing in professionally cut YouTube episodes showcasing complex restorations and performance upgrades. Our subscriber count crossed 50,000. One of our videos hit 500,000 views. I barely reacted. Wins didn't feel like wins anymore. They were just forward motion. The money came fast. Sponsorship offers, affiliate deals, tool companies wanting reviews, local shops wanted a partner. I opened a small warehouse for online fulfillment and invested in a CNC machine for custom fabrication. It was everything I dreamed of during those Austin nights, hunched over my laptop, praying something would take hold. But none of it followed me home. At the house, silence lived in the walls. Meals became microwaved leftovers eaten alone at the kitchen island. I'd find receipts from fancy wine bars in her purse, see unfamiliar names light up her phone screen before she turned it face down. Weekends became question marks. Sometimes she left Friday evening and didn't return until late Sunday night. When I asked where she'd been, she just said out. No explanation. No guilt. At first, I convinced myself it was just distance. Just a rough patch. But the signs were clearer than I wanted to admit. Her laughter on the phone when she thought I couldn't hear. The scent of cologne that wasn't mine lingering in the laundry. The cold way she said, "You've changed," as if ambition were a sin. I still slept beside her most nights. But we hadn't touched in weeks. Months maybe. She faced the other way. So did I. There were no fights anymore. No passion. Just 2 people trapped in the momentum of a life they no longer shared. But I stayed. I told myself I was doing it for stability. For the home we built. For the idea of something better around the corner. But deep down I knew the truth. I was afraid of failing twice. I poured myself into the shop. Started working 16-hour days. If I wasn't on the floor, I was at my desk balancing books, scheduling social content, writing invoices. I started traveling to regional trade expos. Gave talks on digitizing legacy businesses. I even got invited to speak on a panel in Nashville, where I met other owners who'd turned dying garages into empires. They all looked tired, just like me. One weekend, I came home to find she'd cleared her side of the closet. No note. No explanation, just empty hangers swaying quietly. I stood there for a long time, holding a pair of her shoes in my hands like they might explain something. Then I set them down, made a sandwich, and went back to reviewing next month's inventory orders. The part of me that once begged for her attention, her love, her validation, it was gone. Not dead, just dried up. I still kept her name on the company documents. I still listed her as co-owner, even though she'd never set foot in the shop since we moved back. I told myself it was temporary, that maybe one day we'd sit down, talk it out, and find a way to fix what had unraveled. But that day never came. The shop became my world, and in that world, things made sense. People came to me for help, trusted me with their builds, paid me for my expertise. There were problems, yes, but problems with solutions. Tangible, solvable, mechanical. Unlike the mess waiting for me at home. So I stayed late. Slept on the old leather couch in the back office more nights than I cared to admit. The hum of the shop's fluorescent lights comforted me more than any words ever could. And when I locked up each night and stepped into the humid Alabama air, I didn't feel tired. I felt free. The night I reached my limit, it wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no final betrayal, just the quiet weight of absence pressing down hard enough to leave a mark. I came home from a 15-hour day to an empty house. Again, the fridge was full, untouched. Her things were still gone. Her silence had become a living thing, a companion. I stood in the middle of the living room, took a deep breath, and walked into the garage. I didn't turn on the light. I sat on the cold cement floor, my back against the toolbox, the faint smell of fuel and rubber in the air. The silence wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel the full scope of it. Not just the loneliness, but the exhaustion of pretending things might ever return to the way they were. Sometime around 4 a.m., I stood up, walked to my workbench, and tore a page from an old invoice pad. I wrote one word in all capital letters: freedom. That morning, I called a lawyer. There was no fight over property. She'd never asked about the shop, never lifted a finger to help, never shown interest in anything but escape. But legally, she was listed as a co-owner. That had to change. We started the process. Quietly, methodically. When I told her the marriage was over, she blinked. Once. Twice. Then she laughed. "You're serious?" she asked. I didn't answer. She waited for an explanation, for a wound to reopen so she could press against it. But I had none to give. I simply said, "I'm moving out." She raged, cried, accused, begged, not out of love, but control. I had been a vessel for her dissatisfaction for too long. Now I was no longer available for the role. I was done giving more than I received, done trying to resurrect something she'd long since buried. I moved into a small apartment above a tire shop near the Second Tucker location. Nothing fancy, bare walls, a mattress on the floor, a kitchenette with cabinets that stuck, but it was mine. I slept better there in the first week than I had in the house for the past year. Without the weight of the marriage pulling me down, I could finally breathe. I focused on what mattered: growth, clarity, and peace. The business expanded again, this time into Canadian markets. Custom motorcycle orders started coming in from Ontario and British Columbia. I flew up for a weekend expo and returned with 3 new clients and a notebook full of ideas. My YouTube channel passed 100,000 subscribers. We got a plaque. I hung in the shop bathroom just to keep myself humble. On weekends, I drove out to the lake with a tackle box and a thermos of black coffee. No phone, no meetings, just the water and the wind. I stopped waiting for life to deliver happiness and started carving it out with my own hands. I got back into shape, ran every morning, reconnected with people I hadn't spoken to in years, enrolled in night classes at a local community college, just to remind myself I could still grow. I even joined a book club, me, the grease-stained entrepreneur, sitting in a circle with retirees discussing Steinbeck and Baldwin. They welcomed me like I'd always belonged. One night, I drove past the old house on a whim. The porch light was off, the windows dark. It looked smaller than I remembered, sadder. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. Nearly 2 years had passed since the night I left. 2 years of building, grinding, and letting go. The shop had become a regional chain with 5 locations and a wait list for custom builds that stretched into the next quarter. I started mentoring young mechanics and entrepreneurs, giving talks about business, but also about balance, about how not to lose yourself chasing someone else's idea of success. I bore no bitterness toward Casey. None. Not even for the Range Rover. That moment, her rejection of something I thought was love wrapped in leather seats and tinted glass, didn't break me. It clarified me. It showed me exactly who I was to her, and more importantly, who I wasn't willing to be anymore. One afternoon, I parked at the main shop and saw the Range Rover sitting in the front lot. I'd ended up selling it to a local flipper, and somehow, it had found its way back to town. It looked different now, lifted, blacked out, with oversized wheels and a custom wrap. Almost unrecognizable. I smiled, not because of what it cost, not because it had once symbolized failure, but because it reminded me of the exact moment I stopped being the man someone once called a disappointment. Success, I've learned, isn't something you shout about. It's something you live quietly. It's the way your hands feel after a day of honest work. The peace in your chest when you sit beside still water. The silence of a room you finally have all to yourself. I'm not the man who left Austin, chasing tech and ego. I'm not the man who returned to mobile broken and ashamed. I'm a man who stayed and built